There is a moment, and if you have been through it, you know exactly what I am talking about, where you decide you want to build a home. And for about 5 minutes, it feels incredible. You are imagining the layout, the light coming through the windows, and it all feels possible. And then reality rolls in. Not just the confusion of who to call first, but the realization of what is actually at stake. We all know the story of the three little pigs. One built with straw, one with sticks, and one with brick. We treat it like a fairy tale, but if you look at standard construction practices today, a lot of what goes up is closer to straw than we care to admit. When a major storm front rolls through, or when temperatures drop into a historic freeze, homeowners are left crossing their fingers, hoping their house holds together. They assume that because a house is new, it is strong. They assume meeting building code means they are safe. But the truth is, standard building code is just the legal minimum required to keep a building standing long enough for you to get out. It isn't a benchmark for performance, and it certainly isn't a guarantee of resilience. True resilience is engineered from one. It starts with one core idea: keep the building envelope intact. If the roof stays on and the walls stay connected to the foundation, a home can weather almost anything. That is not an accident. It is the result of engineered connections, deliberate structural decisions, and in some cases, a dedicated safe room built with insulated concrete forms, a localized fortress inside the home itself. I am Randy Wilburn, and this is Stitt Happens, a podcast about building smarter, living better, and understanding the science behind a home that actually performs. Today, I am sitting down with David Stitt of the Stitt Group. We are tackling a topic that is becoming more critical every single year. How do you build a weather and climate resilient home? How do you insulate your family from the elements and protect your biggest investment before the storm even registers on radar? David, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here. Great to be here. And it's an important topic.
Yeah, no, without a doubt, man. And I'm so glad we're getting a chance to kind of have this conversation because, you know, there's so much here that in my preamble there, I wanted to kind of lay the foundation, but I want to start with kind of like the baseline expectation for this particular conversation because it's something that we don't always think about. I don't know, the first time that I bought my first home, I wasn't like thinking about weather and the elements. Honestly, not really. It wasn't actually until I moved here to Arkansas, until I had my whole house insulated, that I really understood the value of that. But I want to just kind of come back a little bit. You know, a lot of people, like I said earlier, most people assume that if a new house passes a standard inspection, it is structurally tough enough to handle whatever nature throws at it. What is the actual gap between building to code and building for true resilience?
I love the preamble also because the story of the three little pigs is something that we have talked about in this company since its inception. And it's truly a real story in that sense that you have a choice of how to build. And I think the first thing I would say is there is a knowledge gap in how to do it. And you hit the nail on the head, no pun intended, that people say, well, it's code compliant. And we like to say that code is the minimum allowed by law. So if we wanted to translate that into education or even like school, that's a D. It's a D in school. It means you got a D so you can go to fourth grade or seventh grade or whatever. You passed, but you didn't excel. And if any of us were talking to our children and we said, hey, what'd you get on your grades and your report card? Oh, I got all D's. Okay, good job. Well done. No, we would say you need to do better. And so we are shooting for A's and A pluses. And so, yeah, code compliance is the minimum allowed by law. And in many cases, people know how to get to code. I say people, builders and people in the construction industry, but they don't know how to surpass code. They don't know what's the cost benefit analysis. If I do this extra step, how much is it going to cost? And that's a really important thing that people need to understand, because to your point also, once the house is built, it's hard to go back and re-insulate. It's hard to go back and add structural elements that make it stronger and safer. But resilience, for all kinds of reasons in our world, is a huge and very important element of building new homes. So it's more economical, it's easier, and it's better to do it on the front side.
Yeah. And I think, I if I were to walk in the shoes of the average builder, it's not so much that they're trying to corners, but I mean, obviously they're trying to make a living. I mean, there are a lot of factors that come into play there, but in all that I've understood in studying this and working with you guys for the past couple of years now, it's one of those ounce of prevention things that if you just take the time up front to do what needs to be done, it's not as costly as you think. It can be a lot more costly down the road if you kick that proverbial can down the road and don't do things at the onset, especially when building a house from scratch, right?
Yeah, and I agree with you entirely that it's not that people are intentionally trying to cut corners. They're trying to meet a standard. And there's also a competitive situation that if, there are homes going up in a neighborhood and builder A says, well, I'm going to do it better. I'm going to add all these things. And let's say it costs $1,000, $2,000, some amount of money. In the eyes of the appraisal and the banking industry, those two houses are equal. So effectively, someone who puts more money into house A over house B, when it sells, their cost is just higher, but they didn't necessarily sell it for more money, because to the customer, they're seeing countertops and cabinets and that sort of thing. And so you really do have to educate and help people understand the value proposition and what they're buying. And people have to be willing to pay for it. But I think you take it full circle back to education. If people understand the value, I think in most cases are willing to pay a little extra to have that additional peace of mind. And what we like to refer as storm and weather resilience, structural resilience, that's a big deal.
Yeah. And that leads me perfectly. Thank you for teeing up my second question. You mentioned the gap between code and real resilience. So let's kind of talk about how the Stitt Group actually closes that gap, right? Tell us about the enhanced structural resilience package. What is it? What goes into it? And why does it represent a fundamentally different way of thinking about a new home build?
Yeah. I'm going to go way back in history. Years and years ago, I don't remember how many years, but there was a huge tornado we all probably remember that hit Moore, Oklahoma. Literally wiped neighborhoods off the map. It's devastating to so many people. And I think it was about a year after that, the state of Oklahoma had what was called a tornado symposium. They said, let's gather people in the construction industry, the design, engineering fields, architecture, and let's all get together and talk and lessons learned. What did we learn about this and how do we do this better? And one of the first things that came out of it was, if the contractors will simply fasten the house to the foundation with anchor bolts. Seems so basic. But back in that, it was probably 15, 20 years ago, that was not common. And someone did an analysis that, but it's $65 per house. And the production builders were often going, hey, we're looking for every penny. People won't pay for it. And at the end of that symposium, people said, yes, people actually do want. They're willing to pay more for it. So going to that symposium and learning and educating ourselves, the big takeaway was, number one, was tie the house together. Make sure that it's anchored to the foundation. And if the roof doesn't come off and the walls will generally stay intact and maybe a window gets blown out, but the shell, it has to stay intact. And so then we started looking at how do we achieve that? A little side note that came out of that too, particularly when there's heavy winds or tornadoes, once a debris ball starts, then it's exacerbating the wind plus the debris, and the damage becomes worse. So if you can stop it in one house or neighborhood, you tend to make it less impactful on the next house or the next neighborhood. So we came back and we started doing some basic things. Of course, anchor bolts have always been a standard for us, but we said, how do we tie this house together better? So we get into hangers that tie walls to ceilings and foundations to walls and floor systems together. And we started doing the financial analysis. We said, this is not a lot of money. So we've always had a framing system that we use, and that it's not rocket science. Like, we didn't develop it, we administer it. It's always been better. But we went another layer and we said, but what else is there we can do? We think about, what do they do in California for earthquakes? What do they do on the Gulf Coast because of hurricanes, and the East Coast? We started gathering all this information. And so we put together what we call an enhanced resiliency package that allows a customer, for some amount of money more, and it's really nominal, I think, in the total. Some of it's fastening, some of it's the way we insulate, some of it's the way we sheathe the house, meaning how we wrap it. We do all these things in an aggregate. Every time you do something on top of something, there's a synergy that starts to happen. This is true of energy too. When you start saving energy, one thing leads to another, and they continue to be enhanced. So our enhanced package is a combination of the next layer of structural resilience, tying this house together on multiple ways that makes it more resistant to storms and other things that happen.
Yeah, and I'm sitting here listening to you talk about this, and I guess, you've been doing this for a long time. For you, it seems like such a simple thing. What do you think is the disconnect? And I'm kind of going off script here. What do you think is the disconnect for the average home consumer, whether it's somebody that's going through a rehabilitation project with their home or somebody that's building from the ground up?
And that's, if we can crack this nut, we've got it solved. It is a big disconnect. And, you and I've talked about different things off air, and there's an industry that says, well, if you want storm resilience, if you want to weather the storm, so to speak, you have to build an all concrete house. And so there are consumers that go, the only way to do it is I got to build concrete all the way to the roof, which is the epitome of structural resilience. But it's also very expensive. And we understand that, particularly in a day like today, in our world where things are costing more money. We're trying to find, how do we give people more value at a competitive price? So I really think that kind of where we started, the customer, when they're out shopping, and maybe they're talking to a real estate agent or they're talking to a friend, and they say, this is a great builder and he does good things. And that, again, we're here in support of our community of builders. But the answer is always, it's built to code. I use anchor bolts. I do these things, and that is all helpful. But I don't think the customer has an understanding of how much better it is and what does it take to get to the next layer. And so I think we'll talk about safe rooms. I think that's an avenue where people can say, okay, something I can quantify. But it's hard to say that X amount of dollars gets me X amount of strength. Yeah. And there's Texas Tech Wind Research Center, and there's lots of people doing tests, but it's a highly variable thing. And so again, what we like to tell people is we're going to do everything that we know to tie this house together to the best of our ability to weather that storm. That also keeps someone's budget in mind.
Yeah. No, I love all that. I'm sitting here thinking as you're talking, can this simply apply to anything? So for instance, if somebody's listening to this here in one of the specific major cities here in Northwest Arkansas, where we're recording this podcast, if they're like, man, I want to put an ADU in my backyard, can those principles be applied even to that building?
Absolutely. Okay. And where you started it, if you start in the design phase, and it's important and this shouldn't just be on custom homes, it should be every home, that if people are interested, which I think almost universally they are, people should demand stronger, safer, and healthier places to live. And I say safer and healthier because structural resilience and energy efficiency, they all go together. They're all in pieces of resilience. If you do energy efficiency, you tend to get more resilience. And it's kind of an add-on, if you will.
Answer the question for me, because I actually I'm thinking about doing an ADU. So I'm like, man, maybe we'll have to talk more about that. Yeah. So as we move forward. So listen, I want to dig into the structural side of envelope integrity. You know, when high winds hit, as you talked about with the Moore, Oklahoma situation, and then I might add Joplin and then Rogers just 2 years ago, the roof is usually the first thing to go. And once the roof fails, the walls follow. Walk us through the engineered connections and framing strategies inside the enhanced structural resilience package that keep a home tied together from foundation to ridge.
So I'll start with a real simple one. We talk about anchor bolts. If you go out and see a foundation, and for people that maybe haven't been on a job site and aren't familiar, typically an anchor bolt is set in the concrete. It's what we call a J bolt, and it's set in the concrete. And they go around, put them every 4 feet or 6 feet or however, whatever, again, what code requires. But then the framers show up and they start framing and setting walls. And I'll bet you half the anchor bolts are placed just by luck or dumb luck that they're going to hit a stud or a post in that wall. So they get cut off. And so you maybe start with one every 4 or 6 feet. And by the time the framers are done, because they have to set walls and there are framing members just coincidentally that hit that stud, they get cut off. And then usually because the framing crew leaves and everyone's busy, often those anchor bolts are not reset. So going through a little different strategy and process, frame your walls and then go in afterwards and figure out where your anchors need to go. And there's different ways of anchoring, but do it so that it's prescribed specifically to the framed walls after they're built. And then you get your anchor points consistently throughout the house. Now, we're going to keep kind of reiterating some things back to where we started. This works if someone starts thinking this way early in the process. If it happens after, usually someone goes, well, what about these anchor bolts? Well, we're already hanging sheetrock. It's too late now. So that's one strategy. There's a company called Simpson, and there's a variety of different people that make steel and metal hangers. And so hangers that tie walls together, roofs together, there's a situation that happens in a lot of houses, particularly as we see houses with lots of glass anymore, where if your percentage of your wall exceeds, if so much of your wall has glass and exceeds a certain percentage, you have to follow what's called narrow wall bracing. Narrow wall bracing requires certain nailing patterns, certain metal ties and straps to tie floor system or roof system together. So these are strategies that someone has to put on a set of plans, go to the job site and administer. And they do. They take it from code compliant to, or D in school, like we talked about, to A's and A pluses. So we take that theme all the way through. Read a really interesting report on what Miami-Dade requires. Miami-Dade County, because of hurricanes, has a really rigorous set of compliance for wind. And one of their things that they found is that the garage door, the overhead door in the garage, if it blows out, that's a large opening where air rushes in, and then it tends to want to lift the roof or blow the walls out. So a better garage door, and you can actually get Miami-Dade approved garage doors. They're going to cost more money, but keeping that door intact, again, keeps the walls intact, keeps the roof intact. So these are all strategies that someone has to administer. And I'm going to say this not in a negative way, but we have to look over the shoulder of others, advocate for our clients, and educate the people building these homes. Because unless someone teaches them, educates them on why it's important, the framer, the foundation contractor, the various trades that are working on it may not know that they're supposed to do it. So it's really a collaborative process between builders and project managers and clients. And the last thing I'll say on this, the construction industry is generally quite fragmented, meaning every sub does what they do best, but someone's got to be the glue to bring them all together.
All right. So here's my next question for you. Windows are where a lot of homeowners focus their attention, and understandably so, because they want light and views. I think, like I said, I mentioned to you earlier, my wife and I, we observe a lot of spec homes in our neighborhood that are being built, and we're always like, man, how come they don't have enough windows there? But I think you may have answered one of those questions. But they are also, windows are one of the envelope's most vulnerable points. Without steering everyone toward a premium solution they may not be able to afford, what should people understand about how window selection affects the overall resilience of the envelope? And I'm taking notes on this question.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of things. I think a lot of spec homes are so driven by price. That is a place where there's some cost savings that they can simply remove some windows or stay with very standard size windows. So I think that's part of it. But I think regarding windows, and you are right that some windows may blow out in the event of a storm of some sort, but there's also various quality of windows. You can buy a composite window, a wood window, a vinyl window, but there's definitely a quality. If you go to the very low end, entry level, vinyl window, they're just not very strong. But I think whatever the window is, and I think this is again another piece of pulling this envelope together, making it cohesive, is installing the windows really well. And there are so many incredible adhesives, glues, tapes that make houses stronger. I was with a guy from 3M last week. We're looking at tapes that literally tie houses together better. And he said, David, you'd be surprised that these are the tapes that we use in airplanes, trucks, and most multi-story high-rise buildings now use this tape to keep the glass in. So our industry has got, like the rest of the world now, there's so much technology, and we all have to be engaged in how do we build these homes that are going to be more resilient and stronger for the clients.
Yeah. I mean, that you're right. I've actually been to an AIA convention, and I talked to the people at 3M about the tape, and I had no idea. But you're right. If you were to go inside the hull of a large airline, you would see this rigid tape all over the place, and you're like, why is this here? And it's there. It's partly there to help keep, in addition to the rivets and everything else, it helps to strengthen and keep the hull of the airplane together.
Yeah. Just maybe a little piggyback on that. We think of synergies, like we think of, and I'm going to pivot a little bit to the energy side. When we insulate better, and then we add a better quality window, then the requirements for our heating and air get a little less. And then when you add something else, well, the A plus B plus C now is greater. I don't remember the exact saying, the total is greater than the sum of the parts.
Right.
But that's what happens with resilience and strength in housing too. When you add the anchor bolts every 4 or 5 or 6 feet, whatever your call out is, and structural engineered trusses and engineered floor systems, and you pull all this together, incrementally the quality of the structure keeps growing, and it gets easier, not harder.
Yeah. And I'm glad you kind of alluded to energy efficiency and some of that, because that's actually where we're going to go in this conversation as we kind of round things out. Even a home that stays completely intact structurally becomes unlivable if it loses power for days or weeks, right? And so let's talk about decentralized backup power. How are, and I know this is like right in your wheelhouse here, how are solar arrays and modern battery banks evolving to serve as a home's personal backup power plant? And how does a tight, resilient envelope actually make that system more effective?
So, I'm glad you went there. Little side note on this. We were in a meeting here in our office, and you can see the lights on here. My computer's obviously on. This building we're in is 99.5% or some crazy high percent powered by the sun and batteries. And we're in the middle of a meeting, and the grid goes down. We had a blip in our power, and the lights barely flicker, and we kept going. We did not realize that they'd lost power in this part of town. So you're right that resilience is not only the strength and the quality of the structure on the front side, but it also is how do I work through or last through a situation, an unfortunate situation where maybe there's storm damage, or, how do I get my communication? How do I keep my food from spoiling? Because maybe there's a weather event that happens 2 miles away and the grid goes down. You may not even be in that zone, but you're going to lose power. And we say this, I can't stress enough, we are not in the business about having scare tactics or creating fear. What we're really wanting people to understand is there are viable, very good, very economical options that not only make your home where you live, and we talk about safety and health and all this, and the quality of the structure plays into that, but not losing that power and keeping your appliances going, and maybe your air conditioning for a while if it's a hot, muggy summer day. But it also allows people, which is a very traumatic time, and we experienced this in the building I'm in. We had a massive tree come through this building, and it was open to the weather. The roof was gone. The tree fell on the building. Interestingly, this building was built in 1978. And other than the tree that came through, the building mostly stayed intact. So I think there's something about people trying to find normalcy in the midst of some difficult time. And if you say that I still have some creature comforts, again, air conditioning or food or a cup of coffee, or my internet works, or I can turn on the news. Those things, it may not be your whole house, but you have your necessities. And that is also an important part of having a resilient home.
No, and I mean, I think more and more people are looking into ways to add that backup power to their homes. Brownouts and other issues that happen that affect us all. When the grid gets impacted, as we move forward, people are going to have to take that into consideration, especially when building, but even for retrofitting their current and existing structures that they live in.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And the other little piece of this, and we're seeing glimpses of this as we watch electric vehicles and weather events happen. Sometimes people say, "Oh, I can't charge my car now. Where did my transportation go?" Or they say, "Well, there's some superchargers down the street." Well, you pull down there and there's a car at every supercharger and there's 5 waiting. Well, if you go back to, and the technology continues to evolve, but if you can take energy out of your vehicle and put it in your house, and take it from your house and put it in your vehicle, this ability to be less dependent on other sources of energy. And we ended, I think, our last episode where we talked about the quality of life and this peace of mind. And I think this is another one that people, when the storm comes or when the weather event, a lot of times people are going, I need to run to the bathroom, which is in the middle of the house, and get in the bathtub and pull a mattress over me and hope for the best. People need to have confidence, and they don't, that's something I think people want, peace of mind, whether that be that safe room or something that says, I need to feel safe and secure in my house, not as you led into it, I hope it makes it.
Yeah.
And we can do that. I would continue to challenge our industry to do better and just keep doing more and share best practices.
Yeah. Well, and I certainly appreciate it because you do that a lot. And I've learned a lot just listening to your webinars and some of your in-person talks. And again, I think people need to understand that, if you were just in this for the money, that might be an easy way. But I mean, you actually live and breathe this whole concept of building these types of resilient homes, and you actually work in one. So there is that, as we like to say sometimes, you eat your own dog food. So I think that's it. I think that's important. So listen, I got another question for you. David, you pointed out that when severe weather hits a region, and we've talked about some of the tornadoes that come through this area, we're kind of near Tornado Alley, the financial fallout hits homeowners long after the storm passes. And we just saw that recently up in Rogers 2 years ago, where people are still recovering. And that's just kind of an editorial comment there. Often showing up as infrastructure surcharges on their electric bills. How does building a resilient solar and battery powered home shield someone from both the physical storm and the economic storm that follows? Because the two seem to go hand in hand.
Yeah. I have a renewed or a new maybe appreciation for that, even though the tornado that hit this office building goes back over 2 years now. I'm looking out the window and I can still see damage on buildings around here, and having experienced that, there's the very mechanical, like just go fix it and you put a new roof on or something. But there is an emotional piece that lingers also. And we did a project in Central Arkansas for a couple who wanted a special designation from their insurance, from the Insurance Institute, I think it was. Can't remember the exact name of it, but nonetheless, we went through a rigorous set of standards to make this home just top to bottom. We had all these standards we had to make. We learned an incredible amount. And where I'm taking that is, in that case, because they followed a very set of kind of a prescription from the insurance companies, they got a big discount on their insurance. Now, that's one of the challenges, I think, of this, is that if we said, you're going to save all this money on your insurance if you do this, we could probably spend more on the front side knowing we're going to get it on the back side. Unfortunately, that's not the case. The need to add as much strength and value on the front side so that you have that peace of mind and your property weathers these events is what's most important, because unfortunately we can't promise that, hey, you're going to get 50% off on your insurance. It's an opportunity to educate. And we have often done what we call a construction open house, which sounds kind of odd because people think open houses are finished projects. But we actually want to walk our potential clients through. And we get a lot of neighbors that just are curious. But we walk them through, and this kind of goes all the way back to the start of this conversation. We say, here's how we do the anchor bolts. Here's how we do the ties. Here's how we do engineered trusses. Here's all the things we're doing to make this building stronger. Well, if we can think about educating insurance agents and building code officials, that the hope would be the economics become more favorable over time also. So it takes a village. It's the same we all use, but it's an interesting conversation, because some of what we're talking about is very much like insurance and strength. You say, I hope I don't ever need it. Like, I hope I don't have a catastrophic loss. And we have another saying around here that we say, the chances of getting hit by a tornado or a storm is pretty low, really, if you think statistically. But it's almost 100% that over the course of your 5 to 10 times or 5 to 10 evenings, there's going to be a storm warning, and there's going to be, you might even hear the sirens. So do you go to bed, or do you have peace of mind that you're in a safe place, or do you sit there and worry all night? And that's the paradox of this, is the chance of getting hit's pretty low, but we want to make sure that people feel good about where they're living.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. All right, we got two more questions left. I want to ask this because this was something I was also thinking about as well. But for a family that wants resilience but isn't building a from scratch custom home, what is the case for an ICF safe room? And I'd love for you just to kind of explain what that is and where does it fit into a standard new build in terms of placement, engineering, and everyday use.
That's great. So ICF, insulated concrete form, 2 pieces of styrofoam with a center cavity that you can fill with concrete. It's great because it's the concrete form and it's insulated and it's easy to finish. And actually it does add additional strength because the styrofoam is a shock absorber to projectiles that are flying through the air. So it's a great product for doing safe rooms. And we have done a bunch of these and I love them because it's a great opportunity to provide a solution and peace of mind to customers. A couple examples. We have gone along the side of a house where someone has a window and we say, let's take out that window. Let's build this structure on the outside of the house, 4 sides of concrete with a concrete lid, and the window becomes a door. So maybe at the end of the hallway, instead of a window, now there's a door. And in the event the sirens go off or there's a storm, the family can go there to hide. We have gone into people's garages and we build this styrofoam block structure and we run, it sounds funny, but we'll run a concrete pump hose up into the attic and we pour concrete through the attic falling down into the structure in the garage and we fill the walls that way. So there's lots of ways to do it. It's a very adaptable product, but it gives those folks in that house a safe place that they know they can go in the event something's coming.
Yeah, that's perfectly put. This is the last question that I have for you on this topic. If someone listening right now and they are about 6 months away from wanting to break ground, what is the single most important question they should ask their builder about resilience because of this conversation that they've heard?
You know what? I love this because this is one I believe, and we fully acknowledge that we're not going to work with, we're not going to build every house in America. But I think people have to be curious and they have to feel like it's okay and that it's a logical question to ask. To look at an architect, an engineer, a building professional and say, how strong is my house going to be? Is there a rating for this? Do I have a safe place to go? How are you tying my house together? What are you going to do to make it better, to make it stronger, to make it safer, to make it healthier, to make my investment better? And I think that we all have areas of our life that we're not maybe we're not as familiar with. Like there's certainly things in my life that I don't always know. Should I ask that? Is that a dumb question? But I think customers need to be empowered to look at whoever they're working with and say, tell me this. And if the answer is acceptable, go for it. If it's not acceptable, keep asking. Yeah. Keep drilling down. What else could we do? What else is economical that adds strength? What types of safe rooms? All these things are great. How am I going to weather the quote time after a storm if the grid's out and my house didn't get hit? Do I have backup power? These are all things that people should be asking. So your question's spot on, and it comes back to sort of a theme that we get into on these. Plan ahead.
Yeah.
Fail to plan, you plan to fail. Ask the right questions and plan ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's really great. And actually we'll be sure to put some of those questions that you just asked here in the show notes so people can see those for themselves and go back and take notes. I know people that are listening to this are taking copious notes. And as always, David, you have batted 1,000 on this episode. So I want to thank you again for taking time out of your super busy schedule to sit down with us here at Stitt Happens and just make it plain for us. So thank you again, sir, for joining us today.
Yeah. Love it. I always love the topics and It's a great dialogue, and hopefully we create some new opportunities for the people listening.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Folks, if you walked away from today's conversation with one thing, I hope it's this. A beautiful home is wonderful, but a home that can protect your family, hold its ground in a storm, and keep the power running when the rest of the world goes dark is what true performance looks like. Resilience isn't a collection of features you bolt onto a house after the fact. You can't add a stronger connection here or a better window there once the framing is done and call it safe. It has to be designed into the DNA of the structure from day one. A layered approach where every decision from the foundation, anchor bolts to the roof, to wall connections to the battery in the garage is part of the same continuous system. The whole point is to keep the envelope intact, because if the envelope holds, the family inside is protected. You aren't just building for the calm, sunny days. You are building for the worst day. And so I want to thank David Stitt for pulling back the curtain on building science and resilience once again. You can learn more about their integrated approach to durable residential design and interdependent energy systems at thestittgroup.com. If this episode helped you think differently about your future home, share it with someone who is currently sketching out floor plans. This is exactly the kind of conversation they need to hear before they break ground. I'm Randy Wilburn, and this is another episode of Stitt Happens. We'll see you back here again real soon. Take care.